He was ignored by everyone, until the Rear Admiral walked in and saluted him. "Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. A veteran, ignored by the world around him, standing in the quiet shadows of a military funeral. No one noticed the old man, who had weathered decades of life's storms. His worn clothes barely noticeable amidst the polished uniforms of younger soldiers. His eyes, however, told a different story. Eyes that had seen battles, had lived through moments others could not comprehend. It was the funeral of General Wallace, a man who had served with distinction, but it was the old veteran's memories that were most vivid now. As the ceremony continued, the young guards at the entrance barely gave him a second glance. "Move along, old man," one of them muttered, his tone dismissive, his eyes cold. "This is a restricted area. If you don't have an invitation, you need to leave." The veteran remained silent, his hands clasped tightly together. He wasn't going anywhere. He had his reasons for being there, reasons that went far beyond the rules these young men held so tightly. "I'm here for General Wallace," he said quietly. "He would have wanted me here." The guards exchanged a glance, both of them smirking. "Right," one of them scoffed. "And I'm sure he'd have wanted you to be standing here in front of me, making a scene." The veteran said nothing, his face calm. But the disrespect was evident, and it weighed heavily in the air. The guard continued to berate him, calling him grandpa and old-timer. It was clear they didn't see a hero in this man. They only saw an old relic from a time long past. And yet, the old man stood unwavering, as if waiting for something. The insults didn't faze him. He had heard worse during his years in service. The younger guard reached out and flicked the veteran's lapel, where a small, faded pin rested. It was an old piece of metal, tarnished by time, but to the veteran, it was priceless. The guard laughed, holding it up in the light. "What's this supposed to be?" "Your participation trophy," he mocked. The veteran's mind, however, drifted back to another time, another place. The jungle, thick with rain and the stench of war. The faces of his comrades, young men who never made it back. And one face in particular, General Wallace, young and full of fire, handing him the very pin the guard now mocked. "Keep this, John. It's not official, but it means more than anything they'll ever give you. It's a reminder that we survived together." The vision faded as quickly as it came, and the veteran returned to the present. The guard still held the pin, mocking its insignificance, but the veteran's eyes had changed. Something inside him stirred, and a quiet fire flickered in his gaze. Just as the guard prepared to toss the pin aside, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the tension. The younger guard looked up, distracted, and for a moment, the veteran's eyes never left the small piece of metal in his hand. The motorcade was arriving, black SUVs with military plates, their tires crunching on the gravel. The atmosphere shifted. The veteran's quiet dignity remained, but the world around him was about to change. And then, just as the guard made his final taunt, the crowd fell silent. A commanding figure stepped out of the lead vehicle, a Rear Admiral, tall and imposing, his every movement radiating authority. Without a word, the Admiral walked straight to the veteran, his eyes locking onto him with a deep, unspoken understanding. The young guards froze, their earlier mockery evaporating in an instant. The Admiral stopped before the old man, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, in one swift, commanding motion, the Admiral saluted. The guards, now at a loss for words, stood at attention, their earlier arrogance shattered. The veteran, once dismissed as insignificant, was now the focal point of the ceremony. His quiet strength had been recognized, and the salute of the Rear Admiral was the final honor. The guards, once mocking, now stood frozen, unable to comprehend the power of the man they had just belittled. The veteran's silence had spoken louder than any words ever could, and in that moment, everything had changed. The Rear Admiral held his salute, the crisp sound of his hand meeting his brow echoing through the still air. The young guards stood frozen, their faces pale as the full weight of the moment descended upon them. The Admiral, who had been a silent observer of the ceremony, now commanded the attention of everyone present. His presence, powerful and authoritative, seemed to ripple through the crowd like a wave, silencing all whispers and movements. The veteran, standing at the center of this unexpected scene, remained quiet, his gaze steady, as if this was the moment he had been waiting for, but never expecting. The guards, who moments ago had mocked him, now stood motionless, unable to comprehend the gravity of what had just occurred. The Admiral lowered his hand, but his eyes never left the veteran. He turned to the guards with a cold, steely gaze, the kind that commanded respect without a single word. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. The guards, still stunned, nodded silently. The Admiral turned his attention back to the veteran, his posture softening slightly, though still filled with respect. "Sir, it is an honor," he said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. "You should have been recognized long ago." The veteran's eyes, once clouded with the weight of years and battles fought, now shimmered with a quiet recognition. He said nothing in return, but his silence spoke volumes. The Admiral placed a hand on the veteran's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie, and for a moment, the chaos of the world outside seemed to disappear. The tension in the air lifted, replaced by a shared understanding that this moment, however brief, was something special. The Admiral motioned for the guards to stand aside, allowing the veteran to pass. It was clear now that he was no longer an outsider, no longer a forgotten man. He was a hero, a legend who had been overlooked for far too long. As the veteran walked slowly toward the center of the ceremony, the crowd, still in stunned silence, began to stir. Whispers spread like wildfire, and the story of the man who had been ignored by so many was starting to take root. The Admiral followed him, his stride matching the veteran's in perfect synchronization. It was a moment that would be remembered for years to come, a turning point in a ceremony that had started like any other, but had now transformed into something much more. The veteran reached the front of the gathering, where General Wallace's family stood, their faces solemn but filled with quiet respect. The Admiral stepped forward, signaling the start of the ceremony. He had a few words to say, but they weren't directed at the crowd. They were for the veteran, for the man who had stood by his side through thick and thin, through battles that had long been forgotten by the public, but never by those who had lived through them. "This man," the Admiral began, his voice carrying across the crowd, "is a living legend. He served alongside General Wallace, and without him, we would not be here today. He fought, he sacrificed, and he saved lives in ways that can never be fully told. But today we honor him." The crowd remained silent, each person processing the gravity of the words spoken. The veteran, though humbled, felt the weight of the respect pouring in from every direction. It wasn't about recognition, not really. It was about the years of service, the silent sacrifices, and the quiet strength that had defined his life. As the Admiral finished speaking, he turned to the veteran, giving him one last respectful nod. "You have earned this," he said. The veteran nodded back, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. It wasn't the recognition he had sought, but it was enough. It had always been enough. The Admiral stepped aside, allowing the veteran to stand in front of the crowd. And as he did, a soft applause began to build. It was hesitant at first, but soon grew into a standing ovation, one that seemed to echo through the very grounds of the cemetery. The veteran stood still, his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if looking at a place far beyond the present. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged, like the world had finally caught up to him. The ceremony continued, but for those who witnessed it, this moment, this salute, would remain etched in their memories forever. The old man, who had once been dismissed as nothing more than a relic, had been recognized for what he truly was, a hero, a warrior who had earned his place among the legends. The applause continued to echo across the cemetery, but the veteran remained still, a solitary figure amid the reverence. As the crowd slowly returned to their quiet contemplation, he felt the weight of the moment settling on him. It wasn't the applause that moved him, it was the recognition. It had been so long since anyone had seen him, really seen him, and for a fleeting moment, he felt like the man he once was. The Rear Admiral, standing beside him, gave a final nod before turning to address the gathering. The ceremony was still underway, But the veteran's presence had changed everything. The atmosphere had shifted, and it was clear that he was no longer just a forgotten relic of the past. He was a living reminder of the sacrifices made, the battles fought, and the comrades who never came home. As the Rear Admiral walked away, the veteran's mind drifted back to those days long ago, when he and General Wallace had fought side by side. Those memories, those bonds, were all he had left now. They were the only thing that made sense in a world that had moved on without them. The veteran closed his eyes, the memories flooding in. He remembered the harsh jungle, the smell of gunpowder, the sound of helicopters overhead. He remembered the moments of quiet between the chaos, when they would share stories of home, of families they had left behind, of the lives they had hoped to return to. But it wasn't just the war that haunted him. It was the sense of being forgotten. The veteran had lived a lifetime of being overlooked. Once a rising star in the military, he had been sidelined, dismissed as time wore on. But today, in this moment, he had been seen, not as an old man, but as a warrior. He opened his eyes and looked around. The crowd had dispersed, leaving him alone once again. But this time, it was different. He wasn't alone in the way he had been for so many years. The Rear Admiral had come to his side, acknowledging his service, his sacrifices. And for that, he would forever be grateful. As the veteran turned to leave the ceremony, a young soldier approached him, his uniform crisp and immaculate. The soldier stopped a few feet away, his posture respectful but hesitant. "Sir," the soldier said, his voice tentative, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." The veteran nodded, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me," he replied, his voice rough but steady. "We all did our part." The soldier smiled, a look of admiration in his eyes. "Still, sir, you did more than most." The veteran didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out across the cemetery, his gaze distant. The soldier stood quietly for a moment, unsure of what else to say. Finally, he spoke again. "I hope I can live up to the example you've set." The veteran turned back to him, meeting his gaze. "You already are," he said quietly. "Just remember, it's not about the medals or the recognition. It's about the people you fight for, the ones who need you." The soldier nodded, his face a mix of gratitude and understanding. As the veteran walked away, the weight of the years seemed a little lighter. He was no longer just a forgotten man. He was a symbol of something greater, a reminder that some things, no matter how much time passes, are never truly lost. He had been seen, and in that moment, he knew his story would never be forgotten again. The veteran walked slowly through the cemetery, his steps steady but deliberate. The crowd had long since dissipated, leaving behind only the quiet rustle of the trees in the breeze. The Rear Admiral's salute had been a moment of recognition, but the veteran knew the world would move on, just as it always did. Yet, something felt different this time. He wasn't just a forgotten man anymore. As he reached the gate, the sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting long shadows across the ground. He paused for a moment, his eyes tracing the path where General Wallace's coffin had been carried. It was a strange feeling, knowing that someone who had fought beside him in so many battles was now gone. But the veteran had always been one to focus on the living, those who still needed him. That was what kept him going. He turned and began to walk away from the ceremony, his thoughts a mixture of sorrow and pride. He had done his duty, just as he always had. It didn't matter that the world had forgotten him. His service had never been about recognition. It had always been about the men and women who needed him. As he made his way down the long, winding path leading out of the cemetery, he saw a figure approaching. It was the young soldier from earlier, the one who had thanked him for his service. The soldier's uniform was still crisp, his posture straight, but there was something different in his eyes now, a respect that hadn't been there before. "Sir," the soldier said, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" The veteran stopped and turned to face him, nodding slowly. "Of course." The soldier looked around for a moment, making sure no one else was nearby. I just wanted to say, after what happened today, I can't stop thinking about it. About you. About everything you did." The veteran raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for the soldier to continue. "I didn't know who you were at first. I just saw an old man standing there. But when the Rear Admiral saluted you, I felt something shift. I realized you're not just a veteran. You're a legend." The veteran smiled softly, though it was a bittersweet smile. "I've been called a lot of things in my life," he said quietly. But legend? I don't know about that. The soldier stepped closer, his voice gaining strength. No, it's true. What you did, what you've done, it's incredible. You've saved lives. You've been through things I can't even imagine. The veteran's expression softened as he listened to the soldier, the weight of his words settling on him. I didn't do it for praise, the veteran replied. I did it because it was the right thing to do. The people I fought for, the ones I saved, they were always my focus. Not the medals, not the recognition. The soldier nodded, his face filled with admiration. I understand that now. But you deserve to be recognized. You deserve to be seen for what you've done. We've all heard stories about great heroes. But you're real. The veteran let out a small sigh, his eyes drifting back toward the distant horizon. I've always been just a man, he said softly. No better or worse than anyone else. But sometimes it feels good to be seen. To be remembered. The soldier stood silently for a moment, clearly moved by the veteran's words. Then, with a quiet resolve, he spoke again. I'm going to make sure people remember you. I'll tell them your story. They won't forget what you've done. Not anymore. The veteran smiled again, but this time there was something lighter about it. You don't have to do that. Just do what I did. Fight for the ones who need you. The soldier nodded, his eyes locked on the veterans with a newfound respect. I will. I promise. As the soldier turned to leave, the veteran watched him go, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He had lived a life of service, and even if the world had forgotten him for a while, today had shown him that there were still people out there who understood. He wasn't just a man who had fought for a country. He was a man who had given everything for his brothers and sisters in arms. And that, he realized, was the only recognition that truly mattered. The sun was beginning to set, casting the cemetery in a golden light. The veteran took a deep breath, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As he walked away, the sounds of the world around him felt a little more alive, a little more full of possibility. He had given his service, and now, he could finally rest, knowing that he had been seen. For the first time in a long time, the veteran felt a sense of peace, knowing his legacy was more than just the battles he had fought. It was in the lives he had touched, the people who remembered him, not for his medals, but for his heart. The veteran continued to walk, the weight of his years slowly lifting as he left the ceremony behind. His mind wandered back to the words he had shared with the young soldier. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him with such respect, such understanding. For so long, he had lived in the shadows, forgotten by most, his contributions dismissed as relics of a bygone era. But today, something had changed. The world had, at least for a moment, acknowledged the man he had been, the man he still was. As he made his way through the gates of the cemetery, the veteran's thoughts drifted once again to the battles he had fought. Not the ones on foreign soil, but the quiet battles of his later years, battles against time, against being forgotten, against the indifference of a society that had moved on without him. He had never fought for recognition. It had always been about something more, his comrades, his brothers and sisters in arms. But today, he had received something he hadn't expected, not just recognition, but a sense of belonging. The veteran paused at the gate, looking out over the horizon. It was a peaceful evening, the sky painted in hues of pink and orange as the sun dipped lower. He had seen many sunsets like this, but none had ever felt quite like this one. It was as though, for the first time in a long while, he was at peace. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to see the young soldier once again. The soldier was walking toward him with a sense of purpose, his stride confident. When he reached the veteran, he stopped, standing at attention. "Sir," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "I wanted to thank you again. For everything." The veteran smiled, the weight of his years reflected in the creases around his eyes. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "We all did our part." The soldier shook his head, his gaze steady. "No, sir. You don't understand. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about fighting for the people who need you. I want to live up to that." The veteran raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the soldier's words. "You already are," he said softly. "Just by being here, by recognizing the truth. That's what matters most." The soldier nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I want to do more than just serve. I want to make a difference. I want to be someone who stands up for what's right, just like you did." The veteran placed a hand on the soldier's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. "You'll do just fine," he said. Just remember that it's not about the accolades or the recognition. It's about the people who need you, the ones you fight for. That's the real measure of a man. The soldier looked up at him, a small smile forming on his face. Thank you, sir. I won't forget. As the soldier walked away, the veteran stood in silence, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. He had spent so many years fighting battles that no one saw, fighting for a cause that often went unnoticed. But today he had made a difference. He had been seen, not for the medals or the glory, but for the man he was. And in that moment, that was enough. As the evening drew to a close, the veteran made his way to the car that had been waiting for him. The world had changed, and so had he. He was no longer just the old man at the back of the room, the forgotten veteran. He was a living testament to the sacrifices of so many, a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or stand in the spotlight. Sometimes, they stand quietly in the background, fighting for the ones who need them the most. The veteran settled into the back seat, his eyes closing as the car began to move. The streets were quiet, the city settling into the calm of the evening. But for the veteran, this night felt different. It felt like the start of something new. He had lived a life of service, and though his time might be winding down, he knew there were still stories to be told, lessons to be passed on. The world would move on, but his legacy, his quiet strength, would remain. And for the first time in years, that brought him peace. The veteran sat quietly in the back seat of the car, the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic sway of the wheels beneath him offering a strange sense of calm. His eyes were closed, but his mind was awake, replaying the events of the day. For the first time in years, he felt a deep sense of peace, a peace that had eluded him for so long. The world outside the car moved in its usual frenzy, but inside, time seemed to slow. The streetlights flickered past, their yellow glow casting long shadows across the road. He had come full circle today, from being an invisible, forgotten man to being acknowledged as someone who had made a difference. It wasn't the grand gestures or the loud applause that made this day meaningful. It was the quiet moments, when the rear admiral had stood before him, when the young soldier had thanked him, when the world had finally recognized what he had always known deep down. His service mattered. As the car made its way through the streets, the veteran's thoughts turned to the men and women he had served with, many of whom had never made it back home. Their faces, their voices, still haunted him at night. He had carried their memory with him all these years, never forgetting the ones who had given everything. But today, for the first time, it wasn't just their memory that filled his heart. It was the understanding that their sacrifices had meant something, that their lives had not been in vain. The car pulled up to a small, modest house on the edge of town. The veteran's home. It wasn't much, just a simple house with a well-worn porch and a faded American flag hanging by the door. But it was his, and it had been for many years. He opened the car door slowly and stepped out, his legs stiff from the long ride. He paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. The sun had finally set, and the first stars were beginning to appear, twinkling softly in the darkening sky. He felt the weight of his years, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a life well lived. The door creaked as he opened it, and the familiar scent of his old house greeted him. He stepped inside, the silence wrapping around him like an old, comfortable blanket. The walls were lined with memories, photos of his service, old medals he'd never cared much about, and letters from comrades who had long since passed. He walked to the small kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, his hands steady but slow. As he sat down at the table, he thought about the young soldier, the one who had promised to tell his story. The veteran smiled to himself. He didn't need to be famous. He didn't need to be recognized by the world. He had lived his life the way he had always intended, with honor, with loyalty, and with love for the people he had served with. That was enough. The world had a way of moving on, of forgetting those who had come before, but the veteran knew the truth. His story, like the stories of so many others, would live on. It wasn't about the medals or the parades. It was about the quiet moments, the ones that didn't make the headlines. It was about the lives touched, the sacrifices made in silence, and the warriors who had fought not for glory, but for something far greater. The veteran finished his glass of water and sat back in his chair, his mind at ease. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready for whatever came next. As the night grew darker, The veteran leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The world outside continued to turn, but inside his small house, the echoes of the past felt a little less heavy. He had lived a life of service, and he had done it with everything he had. And that, he realized, was enough. The veteran sat in his favorite chair, the one by the window, his gaze drifting out into the quiet neighborhood. The streetlights had just flickered on, casting long shadows on the pavement. The world outside was calm, the way it always was at this time of night. The noise of the day had settled, and now it was just him and the memories, both familiar and distant. He had come a long way since the ceremony, since the Rear Admiral's salute, since the young soldier had promised to remember him. The world had changed, and for the first time in many years, the veteran felt that change was not something to fear, but something to embrace. His house, though small and humble, felt full of life. The pictures on the walls spoke of a past he had almost forgotten, a past filled with battles, bonds, and sacrifices. They were reminders of who he had been, who he still was, but they also reminded him of the future. A future that, despite everything, still had meaning. The doorbell rang, breaking his thoughts. The veteran rose slowly from his chair, his joints creaking as he moved. He wasn't expecting anyone, but he knew it was time to face whatever came next. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see the young soldier standing on his porch, his uniform now slightly worn, but his expression as serious as ever. "Sir," the soldier said, his voice steady. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." The veteran smiled, stepping aside to let him in. "Not at all. What brings you here?" The soldier hesitated for a moment, glancing down at the ground before meeting the veteran's eyes. "I wanted to thank you again for what you said that day about fighting for the ones who need you. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I realized I need to do more than just say thank you. I need to prove it." The veteran's smile softened as he gestured for the soldier to sit. "You're already doing it," he replied quietly. "Every step you take in this world, every decision you make, that's where you prove it. It's not about grand gestures. It's about the quiet ones, the ones nobody sees. That's where the real battles are fought." The soldier nodded, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I've been trying, sir, but there's a part of me that's always felt like I'm not enough. Like I'm just going through the motions, doing what I'm told, but not really living up to the example you set." The veteran looked at him, his eyes thoughtful. "We all feel that way, especially after we've been through the things we've been through. But it's not about being perfect. It's about being true to what matters. You're already fighting for what's important, and that's enough. I don't know what you've been through, but I know what I've seen in you. You're already a leader, even if you don't see it yet." The soldier's shoulders relaxed slightly, a small breath escaping him. "I've been thinking a lot about the men we lost," he said quietly. "The ones who didn't come back. I want to make sure they didn't die for nothing. I want to make sure their stories are told, that their sacrifices are remembered. But sometimes, I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry that responsibility." The veteran's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on the soldier's shoulder. "You don't carry it alone. None of us do. We're all part of something bigger than ourselves. The ones who are gone, they live in what we do. They live in the choices we make every day. And when you honor their memory, when you fight for those who need you, you're carrying their legacy." The soldier looked up at the veteran, his eyes filled with a new understanding. "Thank you, sir. I needed to hear that." The veteran gave a small nod, his expression content. "It's the truth. We carry each other's burdens, whether we realize it or not." The soldier stood up, his posture straighter, more confident than before. "I won't forget what you said. I'll make sure of it." As the soldier turned to leave, the veteran watched him with a sense of pride. The world had changed, yes, but there was still good in it. The soldier had shown him that. And for the first time in a long while, the veteran felt a sense of hope for the future. It wasn't about fame, or recognition, or even the salute of a rear admiral. It was about the people who carried the torch forward. It was about the ones who fought for the future, no matter how small the battle. As the door closed behind the soldier, the veteran returned to his chair by the window. The stars were out now, their light twinkling in the sky, just as they had so many years ago. And as he sat there, he knew that his story, their story, would live on. Not in the history books, not in the grand ceremonies, but in the hearts of those who remembered, who fought, and who cared. The veteran woke up early the next morning, as he often did, and sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee slowly. The world outside his window was still dark, but the first rays of light were starting to creep over the horizon. It was a quiet morning, the kind he had grown used to, but today felt different. He had spent so many years in the background, fighting battles that nobody saw. But now, after the ceremony, after the young soldier's visit, he couldn't shake the feeling that his story was no longer just his own. It was something bigger, something that would live on through the people who remembered him. He didn't know if he was ready for that. He wasn't sure if he ever had been. But the soldier had been right. It wasn't about the medals or the accolades. It was about the lives he had touched, the ones he had fought for, and the legacy he had left behind. It was about the people who still needed him, even if they didn't always know it. As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard a knock at the door. It was early, too early for visitors, but he stood up slowly, making his way to the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, but when he opened it, he found a familiar face standing there. It was the young soldier, the same soldier who had thanked him the day before. The soldier's uniform was now a little more worn, and his face was set with determination. "Sir," the soldier said, his voice firm, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I know you've been through a lot, and I want to learn from that. I want to be the kind of man who makes a difference, just like you did." The veteran raised an eyebrow, surprised to see him again so soon. "What brings you here?" he asked, though he already had a sense of what the answer might be. "I want to do more," the soldier said, stepping inside as the veteran motioned for him to come in. "I've realized that there's a lot I don't understand. A lot I need to learn. I thought maybe you could help me with that." The veteran studied the soldier for a moment. He could see the sincerity in his eyes, the same determination that had once burned in his own. It had been so long since anyone had asked him to teach them, to pass on his knowledge. But there was something about this soldier, something he couldn't ignore. "You're asking the right questions," the veteran said, his voice quiet but steady. "But it's not going to be easy. The path you're about to walk is long, and it's filled with struggles. But if you're willing to face those struggles, then I'll help you." The soldier nodded, a look of relief spreading across his face. "I'll do whatever it takes. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'm ready." The veteran smiled, a small, knowing smile. He had heard those words before, back when he had been a young soldier himself. It's not about being ready. It's about being willing. The rest will come with time. They spent the next few hours talking. The veteran shared stories from his past, some of them painful, others filled with pride. He talked about the battles he had fought, the comrades he had lost, and the lessons he had learned along the way. The soldier listened intently, hanging on every word. The veteran could see that he was absorbing it all, not just the stories, but the deeper truths hidden beneath them. By the time the sun was high in the sky, the veteran knew that the soldier was ready. Ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to make his own mark on the world. "You're ready now," the veteran said, his voice firm with conviction. "But remember this. It's not about the battles you win or the medals you earn. It's about the people you fight for, the ones you protect. That's what matters in the end." The soldier stood up, his face filled with determination. "I understand, sir. I won't forget what you've taught me." The veteran watched as the soldier turned and walked toward the door. He felt a sense of pride swell in his chest, but it wasn't for the soldier's words. It was for the soldier's actions, for the fact that he was willing to take what the veteran had shared and use it to make a difference. It was a lesson the veteran had learned long ago, that true strength lies not in the battles we fight, but in the hearts we touch along the way. The door closed behind the soldier, and the veteran stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. For the first time in a long while, he felt that his story, his life, had a purpose beyond his own. It would live on through the soldier, through those who continued to fight for what was right. And as he turned back to his kitchen, the veteran felt a deep sense of peace. The world had changed, and he had changed with it. But some things, like the legacy of a true hero, never fade. They only grow stronger with time. The veteran spent the next few days quietly reflecting on everything that had happened. He had always kept to himself, living in the solitude that came with years of service, but now, after the soldier's visit and the promise to remember him, he felt something stirring deep inside. It wasn't just the recognition, though that had been powerful. It was the sense that his story, his life, still had a purpose. The world outside his window continued to move forward, and with each passing day, he saw that there was more to life than what he had thought. He had been part of something bigger, something that wasn't bound by time or place. It was a legacy of honor, of sacrifice, of shared struggles. The soldier's promise to carry the torch, to tell his story, reminded him that the greatest victories were not the ones won in battle, but those won in the hearts of those who followed. On the 5th morning after the soldier's visit, as the veteran sat with his coffee in hand, there was another knock at the door. He wasn't surprised this time. The young soldier had said he would be back, and he knew this would be a visit like no other. The veteran stood slowly, his joints stiff but familiar with the routine. When he opened the door, it wasn't just the soldier this time. Standing with him was a group of young men and women, all in military uniforms, their faces a mix of determination and respect. The soldier from before stepped forward, a smile on his face as he spoke. "Sir, I wanted to introduce you to my team. They're the ones who have been following my lead since our last conversation, and we've been working on something we'd like to share with you." The veteran nodded, curious but not entirely sure what to expect. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let them all in. They gathered around his kitchen table, each of them taking a seat. The veteran's eyes scanned the group, noting the same eagerness, the same respect in their eyes that he had once seen in the mirror when he was their age. The soldier who had visited before spoke again, this time with more pride in his voice. "We've been working on a project, a small but important one, something to honor the legacy of our veterans, those who came before us, and those like you who made the greatest sacrifices." The veteran raised an eyebrow. "What kind of project?" "It's a community initiative," the soldier explained. "We're gathering stories, like yours, from veterans around the country. We're creating a space where we can learn from you, and where we can share these stories with the younger generations, so they can understand what it really means to serve, to sacrifice, and to honor the ones who gave everything. We want to create a living archive of these stories, a place where future generations can learn the true meaning of heroism and service." The veteran sat back in his chair, absorbing the soldier's words. For so many years, he had believed that his story, his experiences, would be lost to time, fading into the background. But now, here were these young people, eager to listen, to learn, to share his story with the world. He looked around at the group, seeing their sincerity. "You want to tell my story?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Not just yours, sir," the soldier replied. "We want to share the stories of all the veterans who have been forgotten, the ones whose voices haven't been heard. We want to make sure that their legacies live on, that they're never lost to history." The veteran felt a lump form in his throat. The weight of the years, the weight of all the battles fought, seemed to settle on him all at once. He had never expected this. He had never asked for it. But now, in the presence of these young men and women, he understood that his story was not just his own. It was a piece of something larger, something that stretched far beyond his own experiences. "You're doing something important," the veteran said, his voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "And I'm honored to be a part of it." The soldier smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We're honored to have you, sir." Over the next few hours, the group talked about the project in greater detail. They spoke about the ways they planned to gather the stories, the ways they hoped to share them, through videos, podcasts, and community events. The veteran listened, offering suggestions and insights where he could. As the day wore on and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, the veteran felt a sense of fulfillment that had eluded him for so long. He had always believed that his life had been defined by the battles he had fought, by the enemies he had faced. But now he understood that the true measure of a man was not just in what he had fought for, but in what he left behind, the lives he had touched, the lessons he had passed on. As the group began to leave, the veteran stood at the door, watching them go with a renewed sense of pride. He wasn't just a forgotten soldier anymore. He was part of something that would live on, something that would inspire future generations to honor those who had served. And as the last of them disappeared down the driveway, the veteran smiled to himself. For the first time in many years, he felt like his story was finally being told. And it was more than enough. Weeks passed since the veteran's home had been filled with the voices of the young soldiers, each of them eager to learn and share their stories. The project they had started was beginning to take shape. The veteran had become an important part of it, helping them gather the stories of other veterans, sharing his own experiences, and passing on the lessons he had learned over the years. He hadn't expected it, but in doing so, he found a new sense of purpose. His life, once defined by the wars he fought in, was now being defined by the legacy he would leave behind. One evening, as the veteran sat in his chair by the window, the same young soldier who had come to him first knocked on the door. He had a folder in his hand, and his face was filled with excitement. "Sir," the soldier said, stepping inside, "I wanted to show you something." He handed the veteran the folder, and the veteran opened it slowly. Inside were printed pages, photographs, and transcripts of interviews with other veterans. The project was starting to come together. "This is incredible," the veteran said, his voice filled with pride. "You've really done it." The soldier smiled. "We've done it, sir. You've been an essential part of this. We couldn't have done it without your stories, without your guidance." The veteran nodded, taking in the work before him. It wasn't just a collection of words or memories. It was a living testament to the sacrifices made by so many men and women. "I never thought I'd see the day when my story would be shared like this," the veteran said, his voice quieter now. "I spent so many years thinking it would be forgotten, lost to time. But now, it's here, for everyone to hear. Not just mine, but all of us. All the ones who came before." The soldier looked at him with deep respect. "Your story matters, sir. It matters to all of us. It's more than just a story. It's a lesson, a guide. The people who are going to hear this, they're going to learn about what it really means to serve, to sacrifice, to fight. For something greater than yourself." The veteran set the folder down, looking out the window. The sun had set, and the stars were starting to appear in the sky. It was a peaceful night, but something inside him felt different. He had done his part. He had served. And now, he was helping others understand the value of that service. He wasn't just a forgotten relic of war. He was part of something larger, a bridge between the past and the future. The soldier stood up, his expression serious. "There's one more thing I need to ask you, sir," he said. "We're putting together an event, a gathering of veterans, families, and young people. We want to share these stories, honor the sacrifices, and make sure the next generation understands what we've been through. We want you to speak at it, to help us close the event." The veteran looked at the soldier, surprised. "You want me to speak?" "Yes, sir. Your voice carries weight. You've lived it. You've been through it all. The people who hear you, they'll listen. They'll understand." The veteran paused, feeling a mixture of emotions. He had never been one for public speaking. He had always been content to stay in the background, to serve without fanfare. But this was different. This wasn't about him. It was about something greater. It was about the story of all the men and women who had served. And if his words could help honor that, then he was willing to stand in front of them. "I'll do it," he said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. The soldier smiled, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. This will mean more than you know." The veteran nodded, then stood up, walking toward the door. He stepped outside, the cool evening air hitting his face. He looked up at the stars again, thinking about the journey he had taken, the battles he had fought, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He had always believed that his life had been about fighting wars, facing down enemies. But now, he understood that it was about so much more than that. It was about the stories, the memories, and the people who carried them forward. As he walked back into his house, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had done his duty, but the work wasn't over. There were still stories to be told, lessons to be passed on, and a new generation to inspire. And for the first time, the veteran felt ready to face whatever came next. The day of the event arrived, and the veteran stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his jacket. It had been a long time since he had worn his uniform, and even though it no longer fit the way it once did, it still held a sense of pride. His reflection showed a man much older than the one in the photo on the wall, but it was the same man. The same soldier who had fought for something bigger, who had sacrificed so much. Today, he wasn't just that man. He was the keeper of a legacy. The veteran stepped out of his house, his footsteps slow but sure, and made his way to the car waiting for him. He had agreed to speak at the event, though it hadn't been easy. He wasn't someone who liked to be in the spotlight. For most of his life, he had stayed in the background, serving without the need for recognition. But now, as he prepared to stand in front of an audience, he realized this wasn't about him. It was about those who couldn't be there, those whose stories would never be told unless someone else shared them. The car pulled up to the venue, and the veteran stepped out, looking around. The event was being held at a large community center, and there was already a crowd gathered outside. The atmosphere was different from anything he had ever experienced. There was an energy in the air, a sense of respect and honor that felt familiar, yet new. The soldier who had invited him was waiting by the entrance. His face lit up with a smile when he saw the veteran. "Sir, I'm so glad you're here," the soldier said, his voice full of enthusiasm. "We've got a great turnout today. The stories are already making an impact. And your speech? It's going to mean so much to everyone." The veteran nodded, his gaze briefly sweeping the crowd. He saw young faces, old faces, and everyone in between. There was a shared understanding in the crowd, a sense of unity that transcended age and background. "I'm ready," the veteran said, his voice steady. "Let's get this started." The soldier led him inside, and they made their way to the stage. The room was filled with rows of chairs, all occupied by people eager to hear what the veteran had to say. The young soldier introduced him, and the veteran stepped up to the podium. He looked out over the crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't used to speaking in front of so many people, but he knew that what he said today was important. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for all the veterans, for all the men and women who had served, who had given everything and received nothing in return. "Thank you for being here today," the veteran began, his voice quiet at first but growing stronger with each word. "I've lived a long life, and I've seen a lot. I've fought in wars, I've lost friends, and I've come home to a world that had moved on without me. But I've learned something over the years. It's not about the battles we fight. It's about the people we fight for." The room fell silent as the veteran continued, his words carrying the weight of experience. "I didn't serve for medals or recognition. I didn't serve to be remembered. I served because I believed in something. I believed in my country, in my comrades, and in the idea that we fight not just for ourselves, but for the ones who can't fight for themselves. And that's what matters. That's what makes us who we are." The veteran paused, his eyes scanning the faces in the audience. He saw young men and women, some of them soldiers themselves, some of them family members of those who had served. And he saw the older faces, the ones who had lived through it all, who understood what he was saying. "We're not heroes," the veteran continued. "We're just people who did what we had to do. And the true heroes are the ones who don't get recognized, the ones who never ask for anything in return. But they're the ones who make the real difference. They're the ones who change the world." A silence filled the room, and for a moment, the veteran thought he had lost his audience. But then, one by one, people began to stand, slowly at first, and then all at once. The applause was overwhelming. It wasn't just for him. It was for every veteran in the room, for every person who had served and given their all. The veteran stood there, humbled by the response. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but today, in front of this crowd, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a deep sense of pride. He had shared his story, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone of the sacrifices that had been made, of the warriors who had fought not for glory, but for something greater than themselves. As the applause finally subsided, the veteran stepped away from the podium, his heart still racing. The soldier who had invited him was waiting nearby, a look of pride on his face. "That was incredible, sir," the soldier said. "You've inspired so many people today." The veteran smiled, his eyes reflecting the weight of the moment. "I didn't do it for inspiration," he said. "I did it for the ones who can't speak for themselves, for the ones who gave everything and never got the chance to tell their story." As the event continued, the veteran found himself surrounded by people, all eager to talk to him, to hear his story, to thank him. It was a strange feeling, but one he had learned to accept. He wasn't just the old man who had been forgotten. He was part of something bigger, part of a movement to honor those who had served, to make sure their stories would never be lost. And for the first time in a long time, the veteran felt that his life had a new purpose. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a storyteller, a keeper of memories, and that was a role he could be proud of. Months had passed since the veteran stood in front of the audience at the community center, sharing his story. What had started as a small project had now blossomed into something much larger. The soldier, along with his team, had continued gathering stories from veterans all over the country, creating a powerful archive that not only preserved history, but also inspired others to learn, appreciate, and share the sacrifices made by those who served. The veteran, though reluctant at first, had become a mentor to the younger generation, guiding them as they navigated their own paths of service and leadership. Today, however, he was standing at the threshold of a new chapter. His phone rang, and he recognized the soldier's name on the screen. He picked it up, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Sir," the soldier's voice came through, filled with excitement. "I've got big news. The project is going national. We've been invited to present it at a veterans convention in Washington, D.C. We want you to be the keynote speaker." The veteran's heart skipped a beat. Washington, D.C., the place where so much history had been made, where so many lives had been altered. The thought of standing on a stage in front of so many people, telling his story, was overwhelming. But at the same time, it felt right. It felt like the final step in a journey that had begun so many years ago, when he first put on his uniform and made a commitment to something greater than himself. "I don't know, son," the veteran said, his voice quiet but steady. "I've never done something like this before. I've always stayed in the background." The soldier's voice softened. "I know, sir, but you've already done something incredible. You've shared your story, and you've given us all the strength to keep going. You don't have to do this for recognition. You're doing it because the world needs to hear what you have to say. The people who'll be there need to hear it." The veteran paused, his mind racing. He wasn't one for grand gestures, but this was different. He had lived his life in service, never seeking recognition, but it was time to take the final step. It was time to stand up and share everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, with a new generation. "All right," the veteran said finally. "I'll do it. For them. For everyone who couldn't be there." "Thank you, sir," the soldier replied, his voice full of gratitude. "This will mean so much to so many." The days leading up to the convention were a blur of preparation. The veteran spent hours rehearsing his speech, recalling moments from his past, moments of sacrifice and camaraderie. He thought about his brothers and sisters in arms, the ones who had fought beside him, and the ones who hadn't made it home. Their stories, too, would be told. He wanted to make sure of that. When the day finally arrived, the veteran found himself standing in front of a crowd of veterans, military families, and civilians. The room was filled with people who understood what it meant to serve, to give everything for something bigger than yourself. The soldier who had invited him stood by his side, offering a reassuring smile. The veteran took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, and for a moment, he couldn't see the faces in the crowd, but he could feel their eyes on him. He felt a wave of nervousness wash over him, but he quickly pushed it aside. He wasn't here for himself. He was here for them, for the ones who had served, for the ones who had given everything. He walked to the podium and began. "Thank you," the veteran said, his voice calm and steady. "Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm not much of a speaker, and I've never been one to seek the spotlight. But I'm here because I know that my story, our story, is important. It's important that we share it, that we remember it, and that we pass it on to those who come after us." The crowd was quiet, hanging on his every word. "When I was a young man, I enlisted because I believed in something. I believed in my country, in my comrades, and in the idea that what we did mattered. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I was part of something bigger. And now, all these years later, I can look back and say that I did my part. I fought for my brothers and sisters, and I did it because it was the right thing to do." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But it's not just about the wars we fought or the battles we won. It's about the lives we touched, the people we protected, and the sacrifices we made. It's about the ones who came before us, and the ones who will come after. Our legacy is not just in what we did, it's in what we leave behind." The veteran's words hung in the air, and the room was still. He could feel the weight of the moment, and for the first time, he realized that it wasn't about him. It was about all of them, all the men and women who had served, and the stories they carried with them. The applause that followed was overwhelming, but the veteran wasn't looking for recognition. He was looking at the faces of the people in the crowd, seeing the respect in their eyes. And in that moment, he knew that his story, their story, would live on. He had done his part, and now, it was time for the next generation to carry the torch forward. The days following the speech at the convention were a blur for the veteran, filled with messages of gratitude and respect. He had not expected such a response, nor had he anticipated the sense of fulfillment that came with it. For so long, he had carried the weight of his service silently, never seeking recognition, but now, After speaking to those who truly understood, he realized something crucial. His story had meaning. Not for the glory, not for the applause, but for the lessons it carried. It was the stories of those who served, those who sacrificed, and those who lived to tell the tale that mattered. They were the ones who kept the flame alive, long after the battles had ended. The veteran spent his days reflecting on the impact his words had made, but he also knew that this wasn't the end. The project the soldier had started had grown beyond anyone's expectations. It was no longer just about telling stories. It had become a movement. The stories they had gathered were being shared nationwide, reaching communities that had never truly understood what it meant to serve. Young people, families, and veterans themselves were hearing the tales of sacrifice, bravery, and honor, and they were beginning to understand. The veteran felt a sense of pride in knowing that, in his own way, he had helped shape that understanding. As the months went by, he continued to work with the soldier and the team, contributing to the growing archive of stories. The young soldier, who had once looked up to him for guidance, had become a leader in his own right, taking charge of the project and continuing the work they had started together. But the veteran knew that it wasn't just about him or even the soldier. It was about all of them. It was about the legacy of service that would continue long after they were gone. One evening, the veteran found himself standing in front of his window, looking out over the quiet neighborhood. The stars were visible in the sky, a reminder of the many nights he had spent under similar skies, in places far away from home. He thought about the young soldier, the team, and the countless others whose stories they were preserving. They were not just telling their own stories. They were telling the stories of those who had given everything, of the heroes who had never been recognized, of the silent warriors who had fought for the greater good. And that, the veteran realized, was the true meaning of his service. It had never been about the battles or the medals. It had been about the people, about the bonds that were formed, the sacrifices made, and the understanding that came with it all. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something much larger, a movement to honor those who had served and to ensure that their stories would never be forgotten. As the veteran stood there, he felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The work wasn't over. There were still stories to be told, still lessons to be shared. But for the first time, he knew that his role in all of this was not just to tell his own story. It was to keep the stories of others alive, to make sure that the sacrifices made by so many were never forgotten. The world would continue to change, and the generations that came after would face their own challenges. But as long as the stories were passed down, as long as the lessons were remembered, the legacy of those who served would live on. The veteran took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years lift from his shoulders. He had done his part, and now he could rest easy knowing that the next generation was ready to carry the torch. The stories would continue, and the lessons of honor, sacrifice, and duty would live on, forever. As he walked away from the window and sat down in his favorite chair, the veteran knew that he had truly made a difference. It wasn't about being recognized. It wasn't about being remembered. It was about making sure that the stories of those who came before him would never fade into obscurity. And as he sat there, his mind at ease, he knew that the work he had done would live on, inspiring others for generations to come.